Guys, thank you for watching. As you always know, that we always try to get you the information that we think it's of importance to you, to the community. We invited Commissioner John Mueller to this interview so we could have a conversation, so you could engage, ask your questions. Our goal is to build a good relationship between community and police. I am not here to speak for the police, as I always tell people. I film and I tell what it is, what I see. Okay, it's not my job to be a PR person for the police department or for the public. My job is just to broadcast. You formulate your opinions based on what you see. The commissioner is always willing to talk to us, to talk about what's going on, because he has a common interest, as we do. Build a good relationship between community and police department. It's much better when we can engage, we can understand, and we can respect each other. Commissioner, thank you for taking the time. I know it's a busy time, but you always make yourself available.
Happy to be here, Ben. I love the forum where it's just the back and forth, you know, kind of unscripted and everything like that. So I really appreciate the opportunity myself.
Exactly. A lot of people sometimes they think that I give the questions prior. Well, let me make it clear that the commissioner never asked me. I never gave him. He does have no idea what questions I might have. I might have a couple of questions that might be uncomfortable. I might not, but you don't know, you don't ask, and you're not interested. You always say that you will answer whatever questions come to you.
Certainly will. That's one of the primary ways you can increase transparency with the police department.
Now, Commissioner, we have a whole bunch of things to talk about. The current situation, what happened in the square the other day, that your officers actually deserve an award for the way they handled the situation. It could have turned out to much worse than what it is. We need to talk about the police reform. We need to talk about kids that have been taken in custody for the possession of firearms, and within weeks they back on the street and being rearrested again for exactly the same things. And we need to talk about the Yonkers Police Department in comparison to police departments across the nation.
Sure.
Okay. Lots of people say Yonkers Police Department, it's the way a police department should run. But I have spoken to you and you say there is still a lot of work to be done.
There always is. You know, you can't ever engage in this type of business and you know, just put your hands together and say all the work is done. You know, it's a very variable environment. You have to be agile. You have to be able to pivot as conditions request and things change. And you know, I think that's part of being effective and being a professional police department, is being able to change with the times.
Now, Commissioner, I apologize. I don't want to look disrespectful to you, but I'm talking to you and at the same time monitoring the questions so I can ask you the right question.
Certainly.
What do you see as one of the most important things that needs to be worked on in your police department?
That's a very easy question. The most important thing that I feel like has to be worked on in the Yonkers Police Department is the day-to-day interactions. In many cases, they're very good already. You know, I hear lots of great stories about how officers handled situations really, really well. They allowed the people to express their opinions and they handled it properly. But there are also times where people feel disrespected, and it's what I'm learning more about each day, which is referred to like microaggressions. And we want to minimize as many microaggressions as possible. So the most important thing right now for the Yonkers Police Department is that day-to-day interaction with the public when they call. Do they walk away? Because at the end of the day, these folks who call us are our clients. And our business is, in the way I see it, we're measured by two metrics. One metric is, are we keeping crime down? Right? That's an important part of what we do. Are we maintaining an adequate level of quality of life? At the same time, do they believe in the way we're policing? Because you can over-police and lower crime, but you can have a high level of dissatisfaction with the public. You can, if crime goes up and you go too much in the other direction, you can have too much crime. So it's finding that real balance. I call it the policing state of grace. And our model, the precision policing model, in my opinion, seems to be a really good way to go. So the precision policing model, real quick, is that I believe in recidivism. And that means that the vast majority of crime is committed by a very small subset of persistent offenders, offenders that reoffend over and over again. If you focus on that small subset of offender, you don't have to arrest the whole world. Mass incarceration doesn't work. There's proof it doesn't work. It's not a good way to police in a democratic society. You want to focus on the guys and the girls, mostly guys, that are driving crime trends. And then everyone else, you don't have to stop people as much. You don't have to make people feel as uncomfortable. So you're finding that balance, that policing state of grace of where you're bringing down crime at the same time you're doing it in a way that the public really feels supported by the police.
Now, when you're out there, Commissioner, when I say you, I mean the police department, your officers, and they engage with the community, how is the feedback? Because, look, I speak with lots of people. I speak with minorities. I speak with Caucasians. And the minorities, their opinion of what you do, not all, okay, I'm just talking about in general,
Sure,
are not that positive.
Mm-hmm.
But if you speak with the Caucasians, the majority are extremely positive. There is always exception to the rule.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but you see more negativity when it comes from minorities than when it comes from the majorities.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that?
It's been a nagging problem with policing all over the country about how communities of color feel that they're treated by their police department. It's certainly a very high priority for me to bridge that gap and to lower that, or to raise the level of satisfaction of communities of color to the same of the Caucasians, as you described, so that we have overall, regardless of who it is, they're happy and they're satisfied with the way we give out our police services. So to that point, we're really embracing the procedural justice model, which has now been morphed into principle policing, which has several pillars to it. And it's going to be a cultural change for lots of police departments. I'm embracing it, so everyone should know that the Yonkers Police Department is definitely embracing procedural justice, and that is giving people a voice, showing neutrality. And when I say giving people a voice, it's allowing people to explain, because that moves more towards the guardian aspect of policing as opposed to more militarized, where it's well, I don't have to tell you why, I just have to do it. But we know that the research will tell you that when police operations, and this is very localized, because you can't get yourself wrapped up in the different types of police departments throughout the country, because there's 18,000 different police departments in the country. They all have, to greater or lesser extent, things they do really well and things they do really poorly. But you probably could rate them. So the issue for us is, are we dealing with what our Yonkers issues are? And like I said, that day-to-day interaction is the most important thing. I think the procedural justice platform of training is a great way to go in the right direction, where you're giving a voice to people, you're showing transparency, explaining why in a particular situation you're doing what you're doing to people. And I know that's a big one for you, explaining why. If you're showing impartiality. So if you do all these things, and by the way, part of what I really enjoy about the procedural justice platform and training is there is an internal procedural justice component to this, about how I deal with the police officers and supervisors in the Yonkers PD. And that's a huge piece to really understand, because at the end of the day, I really believe, and I believe the research will show you, that if police officers are treated properly internally, right? They're not going to work dreading going to work, they're not upset, they don't feel that they're mistreated. If they feel, just like the community, if they're heard, if they're valued, if they're respected, if they're appreciated, and held accountable when necessary, if all those things, they think there's a culture of fairness, that translates into how they treat the public. So it's just common sense, and I think you'd agree with me that if you treat your employees good and then they go out, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to go out and they're going to do unto others as has been done to them. If you mistreat them internally, if you're unfair, if you don't give them the voice, the same procedural justice pillars that are used with the community, they're going to go out and do the same. So I believe that the happier and the more respected we make our police officers internally, the more they're going to go out and push that along to the public.
But Commissioner, words do matter. And the community understands what the job of the police officer is: enforce the law, okay, and go there and do whatever they have to do to make sure that everything is okay. But what they don't understand sometimes is the language that it's used to address the community. There was an incident that happened around Elm Street where some of your officers were using language like, you stink, this is the same clothes that you've been wearing. This is not necessary.
Absolutely not necessary. Absolutely not.
It's not necessary to be used in order to do your job.
No.
Okay. So the police, the people sometimes feels like instead of de-escalating, they escalate the situation. So when they use that type of language, they're going to get a negative reply. Just like you said, if you treat your employees right, they're going to treat others right. Well, if you treat your employees wrong, in this case, the community, they're going to react wrong and things escalate. What are you doing to eliminate that type? Sensitivity programs?
It's the procedural justice training, because it addresses all of that. Essentially, even if you get, for all the procedural justice, at the end of the day, it comes down to this. If I'm dealing with someone who's about the age of my father, how would I want to treat that person? If it wasn't me, it was another police officer, and they were talking to my father, right? Say it was an elderly person. How would they want to treat them? If my son, I have a son who's going to be 21 in December, if he was pulled over, how would I want him treated? As his father, not as a police officer, as his father. If you try to follow that in the context of, I want to go out there when I'm interacting with all different people on a daily basis, the police officers do, and by and large they do a fantastic job in Yonkers. How about this? How about just treat someone who's your daughter's age, who's female, the same way you'd want your daughter treated? So it's basically just looking at your family and saying, if it wasn't me, how would I want that person treated? And if you do that, you're not going to go wrong.
Commissioner, I have been present at a few events where you spoke, and you said exactly that to the new recruits, the new people that I joined the force. But very often, what I say is not what they're hearing. Because once they go on the street, some officers, again, it's a very small minority of officers, once they go on the street, they don't act the way you ask them to act. When you notice that this is happening, what actions do you take to protect the community from abusive police officers?
So what we do is, if there's a complaint or there's something that the supervisor observes in real time, there's an investigation done. And understand that it's not just an investigation for discourtesy, it's also because we have an early intervention system, which is very key to making sure that there's accountability measures in place, that usually people that, and it transcends policing in general, it's people in general. People that act a certain way will act a certain way over and over and over again. Other people don't ever do that. So the early intervention system identifies people who say, well, you got this complaint, an officer got a particular complaint with certain language, and then they got another one and another one. So you're running to all these different people, and they all have the same complaint. So it starts with what we refer to as progressive discipline. I'd like to go the training route if I can. I want to salvage every employee, just like we want to, treat every community member well. But if it gets to the point where training isn't working, then you engage in the disciplinary process. It is progressive discipline, so it starts smaller and it goes up and up and up. But what you're really doing for those officers that you're describing, which are in the stark minority, you're identifying them early on, and that's the whole point of hence early intervention. You're hoping that the interventions with training and discipline will change their behavior. And there's another benefit to it. The benefit is that the rest of the department sees that this is not tolerated. So as time goes on, it doesn't happen overnight. It's the same way some police departments went the wrong way. Bad behavior wasn't addressed, and so more bad behavior. Bad behavior begot bad behavior. The same thing can happen for good behavior. I believe we're on that pivot where we're moving towards good behavior, where everyone knows what the rules are, the accountability level of it, and the fact that we're paid professionals. We have to be better. And to your point, it doesn't cost anybody for just being kind to someone. It really doesn't.
Now, Commissioner, do you agree with me in the fact that perception very often becomes reality? I see something often and I start believing that that's the way it is.
Well, I think that's what we're seeing in a lot of national issues, not just with policing. Yeah, and it's hard because when people will say, I asked a person a question about deaths in custody. How many deaths in custody do you think the Yonkers Police was involved with in the last 3 years? And the young man told me 25, and it's 0. So I think that's what you're referring to, is the perception. So it's our job to get the message out, to show the facts and statistics, and that means not just the good stuff, it's the bad stuff too, saying, well, here's an issue where we think we're deficient, here's an issue we think we can improve on, and here are the steps we're taking. Doesn't mean we're going to solve the problem. It may mean that we may adjust midstream, and we may say, you know what, this wasn't working, we're going to do something else. But ultimately, we're always working towards that ideal. And the ideal is that when an officer goes out, and by and large they do it all the time, in the Yonkers Police Department at least, they're making friends. Because every single assignment they go on, every interaction they have with the public, there's an opportunity to make a friend. There's also an opportunity to not make a friend. And then that is where the negative perception spreads. Because people normally will internalize what happened to them specifically and then expand that out to everybody else. And that makes things very challenging too. So yeah.
Now, Commissioner, let me tell you a personal story. I wasn't very much pro-police a few years ago. It's not that I like the organization as it is. I felt there was a lot of injustice, was a lot of abuse, a lot of abuse of authority.
And you talk about the Yonkers Police?
Yes.
Okay.
Yonkers Police and police in general. My perception changed when I started following the police around, covering crime scenes when things happen, that I saw that the things that I thought was happening, actually, they weren't happening. So I started seeing things with the different eyes. So perception becomes reality. I perceive something to be true when it wasn't true. Mm-hmm. Now, fast forwarding that today, I go to a scene, I'm there, or maybe somebody else is filming, and YPD is doing things exactly the way they're supposed to be done. Protect the person, go to the sidewalk, be safe. But we have some officers trying to block the vision of the camera. Some say, well, they're protecting the identity of the person. No, they're not. Okay? Some might use that excuse, but personally, I don't think so. They just don't want the images captured. I don't see why, because they're not doing anything wrong. So why not allow the people to see the reality? Just watch how we work.
I think you make a great point, but what I would ask you, because you've been doing this a long time.
14 years.
14 years. Of the person blocking, the officer blocking, which I don't agree with at all, by the way. I don't know the situation. I didn't see the situation, but certainly I would not agree with that. How many times do people not block you?
No. I'm saying the majority of the time, the police officers at the scene are very professionals. They don't block me. Mm-hmm. But there is always one or two, and very often those one or two are the ones that create that negative perception. Mm-hmm. Okay, and we need to change that. Sensitivity program, guys, don't block. Mm-hmm. You're doing what's supposed to be doing. Let the people see. Let's be transparent. Okay, let's show the world how a police department should handle situations. When you hide, perception is they're hiding something. They don't want something to be seen. When you run from the police, if you did not do anything wrong, why are you running? So that's the same mentality. I'm not saying I'm correct, but that's the mentality of the people you serve, the ones you call customers.
It's clients, and the way I look at it is like I have one person that I'm working closely with ever since the George Floyd incident, and we have a lot of great conversations. And what he shared with me was that we have a branding problem. That maybe we don't understand because it's not our business how to properly brand, to your point about how to change perceptions based on the facts. It's hard. It's really hard to change perceptions, I think, as you know, in anything really. But you don't solve the problem by doing nothing. You keep on moving in that direction, trying to get information out, trying to be more transparent, trying to share more information about why we do what we do. One of the main, and I'm going to keep on going back and forth towards procedural justice, one of the main things they found with procedural justice training, you can look it up because it's a nationwide thing, is that people were more concerned with the process than the outcome. So let's walk that through a situation, a real life situation. So when someone's arrested for a gun, how they were treated while they were arrested with the gun. Were they respected? Was it explained to them? All those different things that does happen when they can. Or even, an incident where, like we saw in the square the other day, how that person was treated to the point where the police officers left him and the person was placed in custody is more important than the actual arrest. So there's magic there, and that's something we have to really grasp on, is that it's the process that matters to people. The research shows it. If I'm explaining things to you, I'm being respectful to you, I'm allowing you to give your side of the giving a voice, that's going to help the process. We may have to arrest people. I wish we didn't. I wish I woke up this morning and we didn't have any arrests in the city of Yonkers. But the reality of it is, if we want to maintain quality of life and we want to maintain and have a good, strong crime strategy, a robust crime strategy that addresses the issues as they arise, people are going to be arrested. The manner in which they are arrested means everything.
Well, the issue is never the arrest. It's how the arrest is done and how the things play out after the arrest. Now, Commissioner, we have a good police department in Yonkers. Would you agree with that?
I believe so.
You believe so. We have seen the changes from 20 years, 30 years ago to now.
So give me some examples of that. Now I'm going to ask you the question, because you do have a long historical perspective. Tell me what changes you see.
Well, I'll tell you what. Years ago, when somebody showed up at the hospital, if regardless of they knew which municipality arrested that person, based on the injuries of that person, they would know where he came from, Yonkers.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see that much anymore.
No.
Okay, so that changed. The process of what happens after that arrest has changed. Maybe there is not much physical abuse afterwards. Maybe they respect the person. Like you said, you do your arrest, but don't mean that you have to abuse the person who you arrested.
The best officers always, that's the thing, I think, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just say about the really good officers. The really good officers make arrests, and some of them make lots and lots and lots of arrests, and they never get a complaint, because it's all about how you interact with people. And that would apply to anything. It would be a car accident scene. It could be a family dispute that doesn't result in an arrest. If people are treated properly, if you take that 18 or 21 minutes just to make it all about the people, whether the person you're arresting or the victim, and we don't hear a lot about victims today, and it's important to me, it's all about treatment. It's all about treating people with respect. People are fair, inherently fair. Most people are. They will walk away from an interaction and give their opinion. So we have this golden opportunity, and we're building it every day. And it's all done by the officers. The patrol officers and the supervisors, absolutely fantastic. Every chance they get, I want them to make a friend. Every chance they get, when someone's going to say something negative about the Yonkers police, you would hope that one person who had a positive interaction say, well, not all of them, because this is what happened to me. That can, like I said earlier, that can go in the opposite direction, but that's really what we're looking to do.
Yes, and I think an additional thing that we need police officers to do is not to use keywords to trigger bad reactions.
That's correct.
Okay, that is very important, because very often they know exactly what they're saying. I don't know, I wouldn't say the word hoping that a reaction would happen to justify an arrest, but sometimes it's not necessary, and that's what the people very often see.
Mm-hmm. And that's a very unhealthy way to work. Very unhealthy. It's not good for anybody. It's not good for you. It's not good for the people you're mistreating. It's not healthy for anybody.
Now, Commissioner, with all the things that are going around this nation, any police department from any other municipality, state, has reached out to Yonkers Police Department, to you, and said, listen, how are you guys doing it?
Mm-hmm.
Why don't we see the conflicts, the friction between community and police in Yonkers? We have minor things, but that will always happen, sir. But in general, you have a good police department. Are they asking you, tell us how? What is your secret?
Some people ask, and a lot of it is just really looking at community policing as not just a unit, because we have, by the way, a great community affairs unit. These officers are fantastic there. But you have to push the community policing down to everybody. The most important community policing will happen from the uniformed officers on patrol and the supervisors on patrol. Those are the ones that are really making these relationships. Those are the ones that turn the tide of this perception issue you say we have, which I agree with. So I think the biggest thing is just making sure that these guys go out and they treat people with respect, they give them a voice, they share transparency. When you explain, especially when you're in a situation with, because you're looking to get cooperation. The traditional policing model was to show domination, right? I can tell you what to do because I have the law behind me, and if you don't do it, there will be these consequences, right? That's not a healthy way to police in a democratic society. You're trying to get buy-in from people. I'm not saying it always works, but in a large portion of day-to-day interactions the police have with the public, our officers do a very good job of explaining why things are what they are. I think we can all say as parents that you get a better response from your children when you explain why something is the way it is. And the more we do this in policing, the better we're going to be. So that's my explanation to these other agencies, is to say community policing is not a unit. As much as our unit is probably the best unit in the country as far as the people we have there, the programs they do, there's over 40 programs. The community policing gets pushed down to when someone calls 911 and 2 officers or 4 officers show up and people walk away going, wow, they were very helpful to me. Because the overwhelming majority of the public has very few personal interactions with the police. So much rides on what happens, whether that's a negative interaction or a positive interaction. So we recognize that that's an area where we really can make a difference.
I have a comment here from somebody, Philip Armstrong. I walked by a car 301 the other day with my Biden banner and got the response of Trump 2020 from the car. Do you think that cop should be political when in uniform?
No. She's right. No, absolutely not. You know, you're entitled to your opinion.
So is the police officer, no?
He is, but it's not a good idea to do that while you're working. It's not a good idea to politicize anything, whether you're a Trump supporter or a Biden supporter. It's best I agree with her, it's best to just keep that to yourself.
I agree. Now, Commissioner, let's go back a little bit to what we were talking before. Yes, you are working on programs to better the relationship between police and community. I think this is a two-way street. Yes, police needs to do a few things, change some certain things, create programs, educate their officers. But what about the community? What do we need to do to help forge this relationship between us?
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked it, because I get that a lot when we were in training scenarios with the police officers. And the answer is, judge the Yonkers Police Department on the Yonkers Police Department behavior, not what happened in Kenosha, Wisconsin, not what happened in Minneapolis, not what happened anywhere else. You know, we will own missteps, we will own mistakes, and we will work to correct them. But when people kind of put us, or put any police department, listen, the United States is a very, you know, the nature of the way this country was built on states' rights, right? And anti-federalism, where you didn't have one strong form of federal government, you had states. You're going to get a lot of variations between police departments. And they should be different, right? I mean, what makes sense for rural Montana may not make sense for the city of Yonkers with a 26 square mile radius with 200,000 people. So you have to focus. The one thing the public can do, what I would ask them to do, is judge the Yonkers Police Department for what the Yonkers Police Department does. Good, bad, and indifferent. Because there is no national standard for police. There's 50 states. There's, like I said, 18,000 police departments in the United States. There's 500 police departments in New York State. So you wouldn't go and say all ShopRites are bad because one ShopRite's really poor. You know, you have to look at that individual. That's what I'm asking. I'm asking for fairness. I'm asking to ask questions when you have a question, you're not sure about something, and that helps share the information, that helps us get the word out. And it's also important for us to know where we have to improve. It's not all about, you know, saying, you know, we're doing everything right. I've said it over and over again. You never, ever, ever hang it up and say, oh, you know, we've accomplished everything we need to do. It's just not how professionals work. But by and large, you know, our officers, again, I can't say enough about how great the uniformed personnel are in the Yonkers PD. But
Now, Commission, how militarized is your police department?
well, that's an interesting question because that's something that comes up with police reform. So there is a term that's being bandied about with respect to militarization. So, for example, we have what is called a Lenco vehicle. This is an armored vehicle, right? It's police equipment. It was used to sell to police, but I mean, obviously, it probably originated in the military. Now, so you have to kind of narrow down what you consider to be militarized equipment. Now, does it have a 50 caliber machine gun on the top of it? No. Does it shoot lasers or rays? No, it doesn't. Does it shoot tear gas? No. This is what I like to characterize militarized police equipment into two categories. There's offensive military equipment and there's defensive military equipment. This vehicle is a defensive military piece of equipment because it was gotten for us by Mayor Spano's brother, Senator Nick Spano, years ago when police officer Michael Frey in 1996 in Eastchester died because he was shot from a sniper from a second-story window. He got shot as he was entering the building. He laid in the street. The other officers couldn't get to him because the sniper kept shooting. So he bled to death on the sidewalk. Horrible, it's horrible. So when we went to Senator Spano at the time, who was always very receptive to us, he was able to secure $300,000 to get us this piece of equipment. Had we had that piece of equipment, Michael Frey might be alive today because we would be able to get that vehicle there and get him out of the scene and get him to medical attention. We used it in the Ardsley Acres Motel. That's the other thing. It's, we also share, and if another agency needs it, we're happy to do it, where the actual vehicle was fired upon. So what I ask people when we classify military equipment, let's make sure we make the distinction between offensive and defensive. That's at least how I would characterize it.
So not long, I think it was last year or the year before, one of your officers was arrested. I don't know the status of the situation now on precinct on, I believe, Yonkers Avenue, because he was stealing and selling equipment on eBay. I don't know if it was you who categorized that equipment as military-grade equipment. Was it, and what was it?
They were radon detectors, I'm sorry. So the officers have for counterterrorism measures, and you can buy some of the stuff that are personal, but it'll detect certain weapons of mass destruction, biological, chemical. It'll detect certain things. So when an officer goes into an environment that maybe there's a suspicion of that will tell them if the level of a certain chemical is too high that they have to get out of the situation. So that's what those were. So yeah, those. But again, what I would say is, okay, so you can say it's military equipment. But if there's someone who is a terrorist that is looking to build a bomb or something, and there's certain chemicals in an apartment, and the police should have that kind of equipment to make sure that they're safe and everyone else is safe.
I agree. That's a need for the city of Yonkers,
sure.
Especially a large city like ours. Were those equipments ever recovered? Do we know who he sold them to?
Yeah, we recovered some, but not all. Some of them because they went from one vendor to another vendor because they were sold on eBay. So they went to another vendor. So we didn't get all of them, but we got some of them back. We had someone who I believe he was a professor in Colorado who just liked,
that kind of stuff.
Look at this that kind of stuff. Good way of putting it.
Yeah.
And we got those, but he was very kind about giving it back to us.
Now, Commissioner, let's move into bail reform. I know there has been a wave of arrests in Yonkers. Repetitive arrests of the same people.
Yes.
Within a certain age bracket. For firearm possession.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
It's a problem.
It's a problem. What's going on and what are you doing? Are you talking with the legislators about this? What are we doing to change that? Because we cannot have people being arrested, teenagers, 17, with the possession of a weapon today, being released tomorrow, 2 days later, then be rearrested next week for exactly the same thing. When are we going to stop them? When they actually shoot somebody, like what happened in the square the other day?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So what Ben is referring to is raise the age. So raise the age legislation, the spirit of raise the age legislation was a good thing. It was recognizing that a 16 or a 17-year-old person, listen, having sons myself, they don't have the frontal lobe development to make good choices. So we didn't want to saddle people with criminal records at that age. If they're able to be rehabilitated, they would understand the severity of what they did. But like a lot of legislation, this isn't a criticism on the New York State Legislature, neither the Senate nor the Assembly. It's just that as time goes on and we start to detect these issues, now the question comes, can we bring statistics and data to our legislators to say, you need to make adjustments? I'm hopeful that they'll listen. They did listen with bail reform. So bail reform came out in January. We had a very, very demonstrable problem with repeat offenders constantly getting arrested and over again. So the legislature, and I'll give all the credit to Andrea Stewart Cousins and to Shelley Mayer, where they went back and changes were made based on our concerns. One of them was that they gave some latitude back to the judges based on repeat offenses. So if someone, prior to this change in bail reform, someone got arrested on a Thursday and they got rearrested on Saturday, the judge had no discretion as to how to handle that. And for me personally, I think that's a bit of an overreach from the three branches of government. It's the legislature kind of overreaching into the judicial, and we should keep it separate. It's okay to let the judge make that decision. The people, the DA's office will make a case as to why one should, and the defense attorney will make a case why not to, and the judge will ultimately make that choice. Getting to raise the age, what you're talking about, we're talking about loaded firearms. It's a real concern because we do have an uptick in shooting incidents. A lot of them are related to these raise the age group, 16, 17, 18 years old. So they're getting pushed to family court. And even that, like I said, it's not that the legislation is bad, but it probably needs tweaking. In fact, I won't say probably, it definitely needs tweaking. And one of the changes that need to happen is how many times do you send a kid, like you said, a repeat kid, with arrested with a loaded gun and get arrested again with a loaded gun, they go to family court and continue to go to family court. At what point do you say there has to be more accountability here? Because do we wait for the third arrest with a loaded gun and then they murder someone and then we circle back and we say, well, how could this have been prevented? Well, maybe and one of my recommendations, and we're getting all the facts together because we don't like to go to the legislature and ask for things until we know exactly what we're talking about. So what I would say, one of my suggestions would be that family court should be used even for the first offense. But after that, it has to be clear to the juvenile that the next time you do this, you're going to be put into the criminal justice system. Now, it wouldn't even be necessarily adult criminal. It would be the youth part of criminal court. But there has to be some consequences. The way it is now, a person could get arrested for 5 loaded guns that fits that age category and continue to get sent to family court and continue to get released. So at what point do you say, now the kid's been arrested 4 times with a loaded gun and he kills somebody? So what we can do is to say family court might be a great opportunity for one chance. But after that, it's got to be made clear to the juvenile, if this happens again, we have to go. Because we wouldn't be talking about this if there wasn't a spike in shootings and if there wasn't a spike in shootings with this age group. So we need the tools, just like we did with bail reform, to address these issues. It's not wanting to be draconian. It's not wanting to pick on people. It's wanting to say, we want the shootings to go down. We want to stop the shootings. And so the legislature has to work with us, and they have with bail reform, and I'm hopeful they will for Raise the Age, where we can make these minor adjustments to make sure we kind of plug these gaps.
Now, I have to engage the audience. There is a question here. I don't know if it's true or if it's not true. You can clear that up for us. Do you think it was necessary for people to be stopped and arrested, that's the word, by police for not wearing a mask? And they weren't even wearing a mask at that time, meaning police not wearing masks, arresting people for not wearing a mask. I don't know if this is true. I haven't seen it. So I don't know.
I'll clarify. I don't believe we've arrested anyone since COVID took place for not wearing a mask. I don't believe we have. We've tried, with a combination of what's happening and the sensitivity people have to police and how police are doing operations. Obviously, I'm just going to say as police commissioner, it's not an ideal situation to now have people and the police enforce health regulations. But at the same time, we also want everyone to be safe. So we've taken, because, if we have one arrest, it's a lot. I don't think we've had any. I could be wrong, but in the hundreds of thousands of interactions that probably have occurred between the advent of COVID and now, with no arrest, we've taken a much more soft-handed approach. What I would like is that it appears that the science says if you wear a mask, you can minimize transmission of COVID, and that's not a bad thing. So I encourage the officers to wear masks. I'm going to be actually putting out something later today with the officers, especially when they go into a store or they go into an apartment building and things like that. And the same thing goes for the public. You know, we hope they do, but listen, it's a hard for my police officers right now.
You know, Commissioner, I hate to put a political question here on this platform, but I'm going to have to put only one, if you allow me.
I allow.
Thank you. Words do matter.
They do.
Scientists are saying wear a mask. It might not avoid you being contaminated, but it will minimize. But we have the Commander-in-Chief giving an example of not wearing a mask. What is he telling the people of the United States?
I think that COVID is enough, and maybe you'll say I'm sidestepping it, because I'm not going to comment on what the commanding officer does.
No,
but what I'll say,
let's forget about if it's the
for me
commander.
personally, what I'll tell you is this. Based on what I know, and I know it's probably as much or as little as the average citizen. I read the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, about the guidance as much as anybody else. And it appears that wearing a mask does minimize the transmission, especially when you're closer to people. So me personally, in my own life, do I wear a mask when I'm going into a restaurant? Do I wear a mask in the store? Yes, I do. Do I wear a mask in the car with my wife? No, I don't. So I think it comes down to looking what the guidance is, what the trends are showing us as far as how COVID is transmitted, and then taking the appropriate steps.
Since we are talking about masks, before we get an overload, well, you talk about masks, but you're not wearing one. Let me make it clear that the Commission and I, we are more than 6 feet away from each other. Maybe sometimes the lens gives a different projection, but we are keeping the required or suggested distance between us.
Yeah, and I would say that that's the answer, is you follow what the CDC says. Now, will they find something 10 years from now that we were totally wrong? Sure, it's possible. We can't foresee the future, but based on the information we have now, 6 feet and wearing a mask in public when you can't socially distance is the wise thing to do.
And that's all we can go by. What information do we have at this particular moment?
That's right.
Yes, 10 years from now, maybe we are going to find out things that we did not know today.
That's correct.
And say, well, if you had done that, yes, but this is what we know now. Commissioner, Thursday, 2 weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken.
Friday.
Was it Friday?
It was Friday.
Friday, 2 weeks ago, we had an incident in Yonkers that I never seen it. Okay, I never seen it at many levels. How it happened in the middle of the afternoon. How your officers put their own lives at risk to protect the lives of citizens around them.
They sure did.
This could have taken a totally different turn if police had fired back, and it would be justifiable.
Yes, it would have.
But they didn't. And they didn't because they considered a whole bunch of factors.
Yes.
How, or what do you have to tell us about that?
I would say that I couldn't be prouder of how the officers conducted themselves. I've received an outpouring of community support, and that goes back to the perception thing. I don't know if 5 years ago I would have gotten the phone calls I've gotten from community activists and faith-based leaders to say, wow, that was such a good job. And many of them did acknowledge, like, look, if they did fire their weapons, they would have been justified, and they would have been. Because at the end of the day, the firearm usage of any police department should always be premised on sanctity of life. And if this person was going to fire into a crowd, like if you follow, and I know you followed the video and you were there that night fairly quickly,
Actually, I was about 100 feet from it. I was at the restaurant when that happened.
There was a woman with a baby carriage. There was a boy on a bike. There was a good Samaritan. The individual fired 5 rounds. They struck vehicles, they struck storefronts, and everything else. It could have been an absolute catastrophe, and it wasn't, based on the way the officers conducted themselves. And to your point, they did put their lives secondary to the people around them. And that's not what the shooter did. That's not what the gunman did. The gunman made a decision to let these rounds, to fire these 5 rounds, regardless who was around. So what I'd like the public to understand is, that they saw the video, understand that the police officers on the scene, were heroic, they were courageous, and they do this each and every day as far as running in the direction of trouble when everyone else is running out of the way. And they did it in a way this time which was, it was really a well-handled situation because nobody got hurt. They secured the gunman. And they did try de-escalation techniques. They did try to taser him first, and it didn't work. So at the end of the day, I couldn't be prouder. It's great that it was captured on camera to build the case from the person, but the level of recklessness, to me, my takeaway is that my officers, the Yonkers Police Department, thought more of you, the community, about the way they handled it than the gunman did.
Commissioner, any of those officers were wearing a body cam?
That's a good question. I believe ones that were later may have been wearing it because remember, right now we have a body cam, a pilot program going on.
30,
we're
right?
going full 16.
16.
We're
okay.
going full steam ahead with the procurement process, which takes a while through the Board of Contract and Supply with the City of Yonkers. But I believe there may have been some body camera. The footage I've seen so far was from the store and also maybe from a couple of different cameras.
Those officers, are they going to be recognized, receiving any award? If they don't, they deserve one.
I would imagine they are going to be recognized,
That's
certainly.
good.
Certainly.
Do you mind mention their names or you prefer not to?
I believe one of them was Detective Brian Menton, who works with the Violent Crimes Task Force. He's one of the ones that, if I would say that there are, a handful of, officers, so many officers do a great job, but Brian has been one that has really driven crime down through the case investigation work he's done, focusing on our most violent offenders. So he's really played a major role for many years in keeping crime down, especially violent crime. The other one was Police Officer Paul Samayedny. Paul is a footman in Getty Square, so you'd see him there frequently.
I know him personally.
He's a senior guy.
Good job, sir.
He's a good man. And again, they're all going to be okay. I believe Brian may have had a broken hand. He's still recovering. Paul, I believe, is back to work, and it's just a tribute to both of them. And when I think about the other officers there, I know we can't name them all, but when you look at the way the composure they had, all of them, it just really speaks volumes about how great these cops are.
No doubt. There was a moment that we should all be proud of.
Mm-hmm.
The way they handle themselves. Now I have a few questions here, sir. How many community-created programs are run in the YPD? This all comes from one person, Hector Santiago. I'm going to ask, read them all, and you can answer it in whatever order you like. What has been done about the list of demands brought in by the protesters following the orders of the Governor Cuomo in Yonkers Reform Board meeting? All the requirements, or has it went above and beyond? What are the duties and job description of the PBA President and Police Commissioner?
Okay, so let's start with the first one. So the first one is, how many community outreach programs are there? So there are currently over 40 community outreach programs that we have. Some of them are, you could look at National Night Out as a community outreach program, because we have National Night Out in all 4 precincts. Perfect example of how that works is, National Night Out is great. The way I consider it to be such a great community-based operation is the work and the plan that goes in between the police and the community to plan for it, because it takes months in advance. We couldn't have it this year because of COVID, so that's an example. We have the police cadet program. We have the youth police initiative. I can go on and on. We have cops, bikes, where we make bikes for kids. We recycle bikes and get them out there. We work with the Yonkers Force, the Yonkers Force football team, who we're very close with. We're hoping they'll get back on the field under Coach DiMatteo in March, which it says right now, but who knows what's going to happen between then. So we have over 40.
Coffee with a Cop.
Coffee with the Cop, Stop and Shake. We have lots of different programs. What the public needs to understand is, now more than ever, we would wish we could do all these programs, but based on the COVID restrictions and things like that, we just want to be super careful about how we do things. So, obviously we can't do a Stop and Shake site because we're not supposed to be shaking hands.
Exactly.
You can do it, but you can make the case that you could do it. We'd rather just wait until we're a little bit further along in the process and then kind of come back out. I can tell you that the community affairs people who monitor and manage all these programs are just dying to get out there and start working again.
Yeah. Now, Commissioner, there is a misunderstanding in the community, not just in Yonkers, everywhere, about what defunding the police is. Some people think defunding is ban the police department, which it's nonsense. We need a police department in every town, any municipality. What is defunding, or what does it mean to you?
So defunding, what you're seeing on a national level as far as the conversation about defunding police, a lot of it deals with mental illness. Should the police be the first people to respond to a person in mental health crisis? Or should there be a psychiatrist or a social worker or someone to that respect? My answer to them is, I would be fine with that if you could find a way to staff enough psychiatrists. Because one of the things, Ben, you have to understand, and the public should understand, it's easy for people to say these things. It's far more challenging to try to implement these things into actionable items where you can actually roll out an operation, like right now. And so what I would say about the funding of police, in particular with mental health, we'd love to have that. Can the people that are calling for this build out a structure that is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on Christmas? Can they build out a structure where if there's seven different mental health people in mental health crisis at the same time in Yonkers, will they all get prompt response from psychiatrists and social workers? Is there a hybrid version that goes adding the police with the psychiatrists and the social workers? So the point is, it has to be seamless. There has to be symmetry where if you decide to go to that model, you have to make sure that's all built out first. And if it were to be built out, it wouldn't be built out by the police. It would be built out by mental health professionals. It would be built out probably, in the Yonkers case, by county government. Because so much of what we do deals with homeless and mental health, right? They kind of go in hand. So the issue is not opposed to defunding. I see the biggest part of the defunding component to say we need, a trained mental health counselor going to these situations as opposed to a police officer. And I'm fine with that. But you have to make sure you have all of that infrastructure built out first. You don't want to say, well, we'll defund the police, they're not going to respond anymore, and then you don't have anything else to hold up whatever crises go on, right? And I would add this too, and this is where it's a real challenge, and this is where training comes in. If a psychiatrist or a social worker were to go to a person in mental health crisis and the person gets violent, who do you think they're going to call? Are we now going to give mental health crisis counselors guns?
No, sir, but I'm sorry to interrupt. No, they're not going to give those people guns. But maybe instead of buying $1 million military equipment, which is not the case in Yonkers.
Not the case.
Not the case in Yonkers. Maybe that money could be funding people prepared to deal with the mental ill in Yonkers or other places. So they trained for that. So put the money where it really matters. We don't need missiles or bombs or helicopters with 50 caliber machine guns, but we do need people that are able and equipped to deal with the mental ill.
But I agree with that 1,000%. But that also goes to the perception when you say we don't need helicopters with 50 caliber machine guns. I don't know of any police department that has a helicopter with but it's only fair, Ben, because when you say things like that, you say, well, maybe someone does have that. I don't know.
No one does that. I don't know. Right. I have no data, no information to say. My only point that I'm trying to make is there is equipment that we don't need in the police department, and there is things that we do need in the police department that we don't have.
100%.
So instead of putting money in things that we do not need, let's fund the things that we do need.
We are absolutely in agreement about this. That the truth is that people in mental health crisis, unfortunately, probably takes up a large portion of what the police department is dispatched to do. And in many cases, a lot of it comes down to training. It's not the officer's fault that they haven't gotten a PhD in psychiatry. And so, having those resources available. But again, the reason why the police are constantly burdened with every call is because of the way we're built. We're 24 hours a day, we're 7 days a week. There's officers out there when everyone else is celebrating Christmas or Hanukkah, they're out there doing police work. So it's a lot of, it would be a lot of build up and infrastructure. I'm not hearing a lot of the advocates for that kind of defunding going on to actually come up with a plan how it's going to what it would look like. It's easy to say it, is what I'm saying. And I support it, in theory. But, someone has to bring an actionable plan to the table to say, well, we're going to redistribute how we're going to do things. And then you want to measure it. You want to make sure, did you get the appropriate outcomes? Because the problem is with people in mental health crisis is it's so variable. Mental health is not the same for two different people. Some people react violently, some people act fearfully, some people act angrily, some people act very, they're very benign in how they react. So it's a complex problem. And the way we're doing it now by just sending the police out is not, to me, anyway, in my opinion, ideal.
Now, Commissioner, now that we talk about the police reform, let's focus, just talk about for just a few minutes on the board that was just, put together.
Mm-hmm.
What is this board for? What's the goal? What do they do? How do they engage the community? Do we engage with them? They overseen something? What is it?
So what Ben is asking about is the New York State Police Reform Committee. It was established by Governor Cuomo after the incident in Minneapolis with George Floyd murder. And he asked for a reimagination and basically the way I see it, if you're asking how I see it, the Police Reform Committee is to do, and this is across the 500 police departments in New York State, is to do a checkup on each. You may go in thinking that you have the flu, and then they check your blood pressure and they find out you have high blood pressure. One had nothing to do with the other, but it's the physical examination that gets you to see where you need medical attention, right? It's the same thing. You go to an emergency room and one person has a twisted ankle and another person is in cardiac arrest. So the cardiac arrest patient has 5 doctors around him with machines and everything else, and the guy with the sprained ankle, he's in the same emergency room. He's just waiting for someone to triage him. Same thing goes for here. So the governor created a guidebook, which is available online, that kind of built out how we're to go about this with timelines, who should be on it, recommendations of what issues to talk about. And so we looked at this very carefully. And keep in mind that we've not pushed it off, but the responsibility is more on the city of Yonkers than the Yonkers Police Department. We don't want and Mayor Spano was great about this. He always listens and he's very thoughtful about how he does things. And he felt that having it like me as the chairman was not a good idea, because if this is supposed to be a community-based exercise and a community-based effort, it's got to be from the community. So there's only 2 or 3 police officers on the entire community, maybe 4, 1 retired, not sure. There's faith-based on there. There is youth serving. There are community activists. There are education people. These were all the recommendations that came with the guidebook. So the guidebook also asks for how the community can interact. So the committee is the committee. There's probably 20 or so folks on there. They have to address what's in the book. There's 139 pages in this book, and there's 4 sections. So we're going to try to go very slowly and methodically from section to section, with a focus on the Yonkers Police Department. Again, there may be another department of our size with a similar demographic, with a similar population size, that had 17 officer-involved shootings last year, where we may have had none or 1. So is that really something that needs to be addressed? You want to look at, again, like in a physical examination, you want to look at the individual, like we want to look at the department, and we want to see where we need to improve. We're going to provide all the data, and they're going to look at it. So we've had, with your question about how the community interacts, in addition to the Police Reform Committee itself, there are, I believe, 3 or 4 community-based forums where anyone's allowed to come and speak to the committee personally. If they're concerned about COVID transmission, they can send their email. They can send an email in. I imagine you can even write a letter and talk about what it is. Tell the committee what it is that they feel the Yonkers Police needs. Then they'll go back on that particular section and deliberate, and they'll talk about what feedback they got from the community, and then they'll make recommendations. Those recommendations will then, after all 4 sections are addressed, after there are the 3 community forums, it'll go to the city council for a final approval. Well, they will have to vote on it. This is all built out by the governor, by the way. And we were very careful about, you know, looking at the guidebook, because I look at the guidebook as, you know, it's like a professor. So you go to college and the professor says, read this book. This is the book I'm going to be asking you questions on. Well, this is the governor's executive order. This is his book. So we need to really address each and every issue inside that book, because ultimately the city of Yonkers is going to be graded by the governor. So why not follow the book to a T?
Now, Commissioner, I know that you have the commitments, you're a busy person, so we have to conclude this interview. So I'm going to ask my last question, and then we call it done for today.
For today, we'll do this again. You know, I like doing it.
We've done it a few. I've been here in your office multiple times, and I look around, paying attention to every single details behind the shelves around, and I'm looking for a crystal ball. Okay, I see none.
There's no crystal ball.
But I've seen that lots of the issues that we are talking about, lots of the problems that are facing us today, you've been addressing them for a while back, before George Floyd, before lots of issues. You had a vision that this was going to hit us sooner or later, so you took measurements to avoid or to do the best that you could to prevent certain situations?
I think one of the things that really struck me was after the incident in Ferguson with Michael Brown, where they had that incident, and I believe it was 2015, and it was actually what the 21st century policing reform recommendations by President Obama were built around. And I remember looking on cable news network and seeing that the Ferguson Police Department didn't have a representative to talk to the community. They brought in an African-American police captain from the Missouri State Police. And I looked at that and I said, that's where it's wrong, because you have an incident like that, and when you look at the, I would say probably into the billions of interactions police have with people each and every day all over the country, don't rise to the level of murder. But in this case, it appeared, from what I could see, they just wanted to get an African-American police officer to go in and talk to the community. Well, that is, you'd have to keep me, you'd have to lock me in a closet not to want to talk to my community if something like that happened here, but that only happens by building relationships all the time. Not seeing something bad happen and then say, well, now we got to make friends with everybody. You can vaccinate yourself. Now remember about a vaccine. A vaccine is only, you know, some vaccines are only 65 or 75% effective. But I get a flu shot every year knowing that there's a 25% chance I could get the flu. But more importantly, and this is the parallel I'm drawing to policing and the community, is that when you get a vaccine, if you do get the flu, the symptoms are way diminished. They're not as severe as if you didn't get the vaccine. So my idea was the vaccine is us reaching out to people, working on day-to-day things that have nothing to do with really policing. They do, but they don't. Where people would say, you know, these streetlights have been out for like a year. And then we'd go and we'd be really attentive to that and get that streetlight fixed. We just made a friend. We just showed credibility. So the way to do this, to build yourself and vaccinate, you can't stop a George Floyd incident from happening. I had to correct somebody the other day where they said, well, how can you guarantee this will never happen again? That's an impossible standard. I can't say that'll never happen again. What I can tell you is that if you're going to run a police department properly, and under this mayor we're permitted to, you're going to check every box and to take every step possible to make sure it does not happen, right? A lot of times when you look at different situations, you can say, I can see a path in the past that brought us to this point where there was not accountability, or, you know, incidents happened and they weren't addressed, or the community wasn't robustly chased after to be friends, just to make a relationship. I mean, at the end of the day, to your question, I just want the cops and the community to just have a great relationship, because it's great for the community because that's what they're entitled to and that's what they deserve. It's also great for the cops because nobody wants conflict. If my officers can go out every day and have positive interactions with the community 99% of the time, it's a great thing for their own mental health and well-being too, because they're also people. So to your question, like, how did we start doing this a long time ago? I guess it's a long-winded way of saying you build these foundations when there's not a problem. You lay these relationships down and you build relationships when you can do little things, because when the big thing does happen, and inevitably it will, then you're positioned with a group of people that you have relationships with, you care for, they care for you, and you have legitimacy.
In other words, be proactive instead of being reactive. Thank you, Commissioner.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate it. Thank you guys for watching. And don't forget, the relationship between police and community, it's a two-way street. They have to do their part, we have to do ours. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.